The Bothy Storytelling Podcast is a member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. Welcome to the Bothy Storytelling Podcast. I'm your host, Calum Lykan, and here we are again for another Bothy Storytelling Podcast. I promised you I was getting back on the horse, so to speak, and I was going to be getting these podcasts out to you for your listening pleasure. And back on the horse. That's actually a really good reference without meaning to be, because this episode is all about medieval days. Ye olde days. One of the things that I've been doing a lot of this summer is Renaissance fairs and doing medieval festivals, having great fun. However, before we really get into any of that, we better have a wee word from one of our sponsors. And our sponsor for this episode is an affiliated podcast with the Alberta Podcast Network. Not as yet a full member, but it is the Otherwise podcast. In its early days, only got a couple of episodes out there, but the Otherwise podcast is a variety podcast dedicated to empowering diverse communities living on Treaty 6 territory by sharing stories of our lived experience. The show strives to highlight our collective ethno-cultural, linguistic diversity and heritage, reflect who we are as a city, and bring about positive social change. The beautiful tagline they have is, everyone has a story, but not everyone is a storyteller. So I've podcast that I can certainly believe in. So that's the Otherwise podcast. Very new. Certainly what we'd recommend for you to do is definitely have a listen to it and subscribe to the podcast. And their website is otherwiseshow.com. So you can have a look at their website, otherwiseshow.com. The Otherwise podcast, a variety podcast dedicated to empowering diverse communities living on Treaty 6 land to sharing their stories and their lived life experiences. So have a listen to the Otherwise podcast. Subscribe to them, let's support them, and they will become a member of the Alberta Podcast Network, hopefully in the future, but they are an affiliated one currently at the moment, and they are sponsoring today's The Bothy Storytelling Podcast. Ye olde days. The medieval or Renaissance festivals, that's what we're talking about. We're not actually talking about time travel back to the medieval times. One of the things that I do a lot of work with is the medieval festivals. In particular, the two that I am most commonly booked for are Brook's Medieval Fair and Cochrane's Medieval Fair. And I love these events. If you've never been to a medieval event or a Renaissance fair, as they're sometimes known, shame on you. Get yourself along to them. Probably won't be any until next year, but they are tremendous events. So much fun. And as a performer, they're even more amazing because you get to meet a wealth of wonderful people. I kind of get the twofold factor because I do a little bit of reenactment as well as the kind of performance storytelling. I get to hang out with not just the entertainers, the magicians, the jugglers, the jesters, the statues. I also get to hang out with the reenactors, the jousters, the knights, the Vikings, the gladiators, and it makes for a wonderful and exciting time. And I've got to be honest, the Renaissance fairs I love to bits because you end up becoming a wee bit of a family there. Everybody knows you, everybody gets on with you. At night, once the job's done, you all gather. Sometimes you have a wee feast together. Sometimes you sit round the fire and just drink and tell stories and have a laugh and just enjoy each other's company after the mayhem of the day. But when I do a medieval fair, quite often I'm storytelling or hosting the event. And let's take Brooks as an example, because it's a slightly larger event. When I do Brooks, I'll be working the stage, doing a wee half-hour set continually throughout the day, maybe 3 or 4 sets. I'll be roaming about telling stories, just meeting people, enjoying the atmosphere. At night, I get invited along to the feast, so I get a lovely meal as well, but I also entertain and tell stories during the feast. It's awesome. It's a great time. But if you've never been to one, let me paint a wee picture of it. Imagine a wonderful and eclectic mix of historical time periods and fantasy time periods, because you have everything from Viking societies to medieval knights to jousting to the SCA to LARPing. It's all there. So you have people dressed up in a wealth of different clothing: pirates, dragons, gladiators, unicorns, fairies. It's all there. So when I do the events, I just dress in a kind of very generic sort of storytelling bard-esque outfit because it fits in with the feel of the place. But when you're roaming a medieval fair, you have all the sights to see, the people to talk to, but loads of events. You know, you can watch the jousting and all the horse displays. You can go and watch guys wail upon each other with swords and armour. And when those guys get going, it is amazing. Body checks, kicks, body slams, whacking each other. It's full of fun. So much to see and do. And then the entertainment, the roaming performers on stilts, the statues, the storytellers, the jugglers, the town criers. It's all there. Medieval fairs, to me, are just such a great working piece of fun. Yes, I work, but they're pure joy to go to. You get to relax and chill. At night, you're camping on site, so you're hanging with all the guys and girls that are working it. It's amazing. I absolutely love it. But when you're roaming these events, you just immerse yourself in this world. But one of my favourite things, I've got to be honest, the thing that I enjoy about the medieval fairs is actually the market stall, because you don't usually get to buy such wonderful and mixed items, weapons and armour, beautiful trinkets, drinking horns, leather work. There's just a huge variety of stalls there selling their wares. Most of it is handcrafted, some of it's imported. It doesn't matter, it's all amazing, and it's not your common wares. So you really can pick up something interesting and unique pieces at these events. And I suppose that brings me on to the next reason I love medieval fairs. Picking up unique pieces. I'm going to get slapped for saying that. But the reason I particularly love Brooks, the Cochrane one is amazing. It's a wee smaller event. It's more intimate, but it's such a fun day. But the real reason I love Brooks is because that's actually where I met my partner, my fiancée. That's where we got together. So Brooks is a really special fair for us. It's not only her that I met there, obviously my housemate I met there as well, and one of my great friends also was working the event, enjoying the event. It's hard to say. I would need to think of the proper term for what he was doing. However, I suppose he's the best place to start. I mentioned how I'd met my partner there and a very good friend, but it kind of all forms together. You see, one of the things that I mentioned that I do at the medieval fairs is quite often I get invited to host and storytell at the evening feast. Now, my good friend, he was actually the king of the whole medieval fair that year with his partner. So they were the king and queen roaming about looking regal. They had come to see some of the shows, sitting on the thrones, acting the part beautifully, may I add. He'll kill me for saying this, he's an amateur dramatics man. I always wind him up about that, I genuinely have no problems with amateur dramatics and people that do theatre and all that. But when you've got a friend like this, you can't help but just use that expression. There's a reason it's called amateur dramatics, because it's amateur. I don't believe that for a minute, but I just love winding him up because you know what? It's what friends do. However, he is an amazing performer. When he was doing the king, he was phenomenal. He played the part, he stayed in character. We loved it. It really made the event special. And he kept coming along to see the shows, etc. And at night, during the feast, I was telling stories. And then what they do is they auction off the king's table. There's spare seats. You can dine with the king. It means you get waited on hand and foot by the page boys, etc. It's wonderful. So there I was doing my show and people had bid on seats and there was one seat left. So they went to auction the seat off and the king stood up and said, I feel we should give this one to the storyteller for his excellent tales, which was delightful. And the crowd cheered. So I ended up sitting at the king's table, drinking and chatting with the king. But some of the other people who had voted and bid on the table, I recognised from the day. There was two young ladies and an older lady, the mother of one of the ladies, and they had been roaming about and I'd seen them at my show all day, and I'd seen them wandering about and we'd ran into each other a few times and I'll be honest, I got accused of stalking. This is not true, okay? I did not stalk. It is very hard to avoid people in a medieval fair. And when they come to see your show 2 or 3 times, that's not stalking, okay? I'm just putting that out there, folks. However, we got chatting and I must admit, one of the young ladies had caught my eye and she was a very bonny lass and delightful. And then when we got talking and drinking, we just really connected and got on really well and we had a wonderful night chatting. But what I discovered is her mum was really promoting this idea of me and her kind of connecting, and I found that really unnerving to begin with. On hindsight, now that I'm part of this family, it just makes perfect sense. They're just, that's my future mother-in-law through and through for you. But yeah, we had this wonderful night and we drank and we chatted and we stayed there until, it must have been about midnight. All of us, the king, the queen, these 3 ladies, a couple other couples and that joined us and we just had an amazing, silly night, shooting the shit, having fun and just having a great night. And we decided it wouldn't end there. We thought, let's go to the nightclub. So we all started to get packed up and left. And the king, well, for a big guy who's supposed to be a man that can hold his drink, he rolled out of that tent. He was certainly drunk under the table. Drunk under the table. Drank, drunk. We'll work that one out later. Anyway, the Scotsman drank him under the table and he rolled out. He was bundled into a car and whisked off home. And then we noticed that the damn fool had left all his belongings, his sword and other items. So we thought we'd be nice and we'd put that in our car and, we were all kind of staying in the same vicinity with hotels. So we went back to the hotels and we decided underneath the one I was in was Brooks's nightclub. Now, ladies and gents, if I could give you one piece of strong advice in this world, and it's not often I will inflict any advice upon people, but here it is. Just don't. Okay, just don't. If you're ever in Brooks and at a loose end, just don't. Stay in your hotel room. Watch the cable. It would just be a lot better for your soul. We went in there and it was a very interesting and eclectic little mix. Different cultures in there, different musical tastes. Wonderful. There I am in my kilt at the time. And we're all just standing, drinking, chatting. A couple of guys from the fair had come with us. And all of a sudden I felt this nudge on my hip and I turned around and there was a young lady there. A different young lady looking at me. But not like as if to say hi. It was one of those weird and wonderful stares of it was kind of creepy. That's what I'm going to say. It was intense and creepy. So I just kind of nodded, turned back to the conversation. A couple of seconds later, there was a wee nudge in my hip again. Turned round, same young lady. I nodded and smiled and started to get a wee bit creeped out, got back into the conversation. And it happened a 3rd time. Now, thankfully, this is when one of the ladies stepped in and kind of shooed her away. And it was explained to me that was a very crude attempt at flirting. Now, I don't know Canada. I've only really had one experience of Canadian flirting and it ended in a relationship. I can't even say it was flirting. I'm not entirely sure. I probably flirted. I don't know if she did. I need to ask her, actually. However, if this is your attempts at flirting, it's really creepy and the rest of the world won't get it. I presume it's only individuals that try this. Maybe from Brooks. I don't know. I love Brooks. It's a great wee place, but that really freaked me out. However, the night progressed. And then we all said goodnight, went back to our rooms, and the next day met up again at the fair. And just that day was really nice. We were all hungover and I was rough as a badger. Oh my God, the king was worse. He was really rough. And we all had a great day, but I had a plan the next day, you see. I decided we had his sword. We were going to ransom it back to the king. But in the meantime, the ladies had decided to be nice and return the sword to the king, which, much to my chagrin, I was rather annoyed at that. However, it turned out to be a wonderful moment because I was telling my story and they told the king what my plans were. And I was telling my story and all of a sudden here come the king and queen and they sit down again. But this time they've got a small armed guard with them. And the guard slowly surrounds the stage area as I'm telling my stories, to which me kind of thinking, what's going on here? They kind of had their hands on the hilts of their swords, as if waiting on an order. But I told my stories and nothing happened, much to my pleasure. And, you know, we dispersed. And then the king came and told me that he was considering giving the kill order for my treachery, but he enjoyed my story so much that it saved me. However, I just loved that little bit of pageantry because, again, it made my day. And ever from that moment on, that was a friendship sealed. That was me and the king, as we call him to this day, sealed. Great friends. He's now living in Calgary. And we're meeting up for drinks and just chats every so often. Wonderful. But that day progressed also with a young lady, you know, chatting, just developing a friendship. And we went our separate ways and messaged and messaged and messaged. And my next stop was Edmonton Fringe. And she had decided to come and visit me in Edmonton just to kind of get to know me a wee bit better and see if things could develop. But of course, it wasn't going to be any ordinary meeting. This is my future family and is my current family now as well, I suppose. And nothing is ever done normally. I basically was to be given the pure baptism of fire because it was decided the whole family would come up and meet me. The mum and dad, they love theatre, they love the arts, so the Fringe to them is a great time. And I was to meet the brother, who is a handicapped brother and is the apple of the family's eye. So this was the real baptism of fire. If he didn't like me, all bets were off. So you can imagine I was absolutely terrified. But ladies and gents, you know the ending to this story already, because the reality is I'm still in Canada. I'm with the lady. We're getting married next year. I'm going through my visa process. Life is joyful, and medieval fairs are the reason I'm in Canada. So that's basically the reason I love them. I want to promote them. I think they're great. And Brooks saved my, didn't save my life. It just gave me a wonderful future. So I would highly recommend going to all medieval fairs. But you know, there is a problem here. Because here I'm being all excited about medieval things, but sometimes medieval things do kind of annoy me. And one of the weird medieval things that's really annoying me of late is, you know how they're doing movies and what's it called? Is it whitewash or something like that's the term? Where they're doing different cultural movies, but they're hiring like American actors to do them. You know, so you've got a movie with Chinese characters, but they're being played by an American guy, a white American guy, yada, yada, yada. You know where I'm coming from. This isn't a political, racial rant. But my biggest issue is Scotland has actually generated some cracking actors. I don't know, you might have heard a few of them. There's a wee fella called Sean Connery, for example. Another wee guy called, what's his name? Well, I mean, he's a loose cannon one, but Gerard Butler is technically Scottish. So there's a lot of really good Scottish actors, although Butler's a bit more Americanised, admittedly. But recently, the group I used to work with or be a part of, Combat International and Clan Ranald, they've been involved in so many TV things. I've probably mentioned Outlander, and originally they started in Braveheart, they did Gladiator. They've done loads of these wonderful, wonderful shows. I've seen them in many things. Norseman, if you ever get a chance to watch Norseman on Netflix, hilarious spoof on the Vikings, but they're involved in that as well. But recently, another great, iconic medieval warrior of Scotland was chosen to be part of a movie They decided to make a movie. I thought it was a TV series originally, but they decided to make it a movie. And Clan Ranald, the guys from that, the girls from that, and Combat International, they're all involved in it. Wonderful, doing the combat training and as extras. Love it. These guys are just doing amazing stuff. But they decided to make a new movie, and it's called The Outlaw King. It's coming out in Sky in the next couple of days. Not Sky. Gosh. Haha. Oh my God. There's a really old UK reference, Sky TV. Where did that come from? Let's go back. It's coming out on Netflix in the next few days. And Outlaw King, and it's all about Robert the Bruce. The Bruce, the King of Scotland, the man that finally gave and won Scotland's independence. Fantastic. Scottish character. I believe it was even filmed in Scotland in various places. Amazing. So who do they get to play Robert the Bruce? Do they get a fine upcoming Scottish actor, a heroic, warlike figurehead? No. They get Christopher Pine. Now, if you're not familiar, most of you probably should know, Captain Kirk in the new Star Trek movies. Okay? He's a great actor. I've enjoyed most of the movies this guy's been in. But he's no Scottish. He's not Scottish. And this drives me insane because what we're now going to get is potentially, and I'm not going to pass judgment on this bit yet, but the chances are a really bad Scottish accent. Now, the reality is there are some great Scottish actors out there that could have played this part, so why get a big Hollywood name to play such a wonderful and powerful potential role? And let's wait to see if it is going to be a really good historically accurate movie or another Braveheart. Now, anyone who knows me knows you don't get me started on Braveheart. It's wrong. I love the movie. I've watched it. I enjoy it. The soundtrack's beautiful. It's a fun piece of, entertainment. A little bit of history in there, not much really. They've messed it up. And then, of course, you've got Mel Gibson. Oh, why? Why? Honestly, why Mel Gibson with the worst Scottish accent you have ever heard? And now we have Outlaw King with Chris. Now, I don't know if his accent's going to be any good. I hope it is, but the chances are it's going to be a wee bit off and it's going to just grate on my nerves a little. However, I'm more concerned that they get the history, they get the actual story of the Bruce right, because this was a very complex man. This was a man who was as much a traitor to Scotland as he was a hero. He fought against Scotland as many times as he fought with Scotland. He was a man that did everything to keep his title, to keep his honour, to win his family name, the Crown of Scotland. And he was forced into it when he actually killed a fellow competitor, shall we say, on holy ground in Dumfries, if memory serves me right, in Scotland. This is a man that for years hid in the heather, building his armies, slowly fighting back against the English. But there's a lot of stuff about him a lot of people don't know. One of the things that people always say when they enter Scotland is, why are all the castles in ruins? That's because when the Bruce took them back off the English, they had to destroy the castles to keep them from falling back into the English arms. So the Bruce did some amazing stuff, but one of the really interesting things, I've got a good friend in Edinburgh who's a Cummings, and he's from the line of Comyn. Now, Comyn were the other family who were desperate for the Scottish throne. They put the puppet King Balliol on the throne, but they were kind of controlling everything in the background. The Comyns were a really powerful family from the north-east of Scotland. And when the Bruce took over as king, he ended up having to pretty much fight them. And from all accounts, he almost wiped out the Comyns. And if the people on their lands refused to ally with him, he put them to the sword as well. So we're looking at a very complex, a very dark, a very typically medieval figure. I just hope they don't turn it in to a really weak-arsed Disney version. I know it's not Disney that's making it, and I apologise, Disney. I mean, I know you've made some cracking movies, but I just hope they don't make it some soft, romantic nonsense and throw in love and affairs. You know, his wife and daughter were put in cages and hung off the walls of Berwick for years during his campaigns. So I just kind of want to see how they cover all this darkness. But most importantly, ladies and gents, I want to see and hear how the accent is. That'll be the winner for me. If his accent is at least passable, we've got the start of something that I can actually bear to watch. Because when I watch Braveheart, I won't lie, Mel Gibson's dialogue doesn't usually exist for me. Everyone else exists. Mel Gibson is more of a mime artist in that movie for me because I just need to shut out his vocals. They cause me pain. So hopefully Chris does the Scottish accent a wee bit of justice. You know, I mean, I've been working in my accent all my life, so, you know, I appreciate it's a very hard accent to master. But The Outlaw King, you know, is coming out soon on Netflix. I reckon it'll be worth a watch. It'll be a bit of Scottish history. Hopefully they'll do a bit of justice. Usually with the Clanranald and Combat International guys, at least they put on a good show. I don't think they've got much control over actually any of the contents of the shows, but they do their damnedest to make sure everything that they're doing is authentic within the realms of what the movies and the producers want. So have a look at that. It could either be a wonderful Scottish movie or it could be another Braveheart. You know, because Braveheart to the Scots is what Valhalla Rising is to the Norse. That's a private joke there, folks. You'll now need to look at Valhalla Rising, but advice would be don't. It's just don't. Again, it's one of those. Calum Lykan's don't for movie recommendations is Valhalla Rising. Leave it alone. It'll hurt you. You will then come back to me and say, why didn't you warn us? And I'll have to remind you that I did warn you. But you'll be like, but Calum, you mentioned it and you piqued our interest and we had to go watch it and we're blaming you for the hour and a half to 2 hours of our lives where we had to lock away all the sharp implements in the house. That's all I'm going to say. However, let's move on, folks. Medieval Fairs, good. Outlaw King, we'll wait and see. Valhalla Rising and Braveheart, watch at your own peril. Let's move on to a wee story. Keeping it in the theme, medieval fairs, medieval Scotland, Robert the Bruce. You know what? There's only one medieval story I think I can tell today, and that is all about Robert the Bruce. You see, Robert the Bruce didn't want to become king. You know, he knew it was in his future, but it came to him a lot quicker than he expected. It all started with, you know, various events. He was betrayed by a Comyn. You know, they met and made a deal, basically, that the throne would go to Robert the Bruce. But what Robert didn't know was that the Comyns had sent a letter to Longshanks, Edward Longshanks, that basically the Bruce was looking to overthrow Scotland and take the kingship from Longshanks. So the Bruce unexpectedly gets called down to London. You know, he's fought with the English. He's fought beside Longshanks. So he's thinking nothing of this. And as he's about to enter the court of Longshanks, he gets slipped a little parcel. And that parcel is said to have had a couple of gold coins and a set of spurs in it. And it was a warning to run, to flee the country. You've been discovered. And that's what the Bruce did. He bought a horse and he rode back to Scotland. And he was furious because he knew he'd been betrayed. So he calls a meeting with Comyn at a place called Greyfriars Kirkyard in Dumfries. And he sits there and they're having a wee chat and everything seems quite peaceful until the Bruce stands up and accuses him. Why did you betray me? Why did you betray me? And at that point, swords are drawn. A fight takes place, and it's said Robert the Bruce kills the Comyn. Now, there's a couple of variations to that ending. One is that he wounds him, walks out and tells his men that were waiting to finish him off, and they go and kill him. But either way, it matters not. You see, Robert the Bruce has now been found out by Longshanks that he was trying to take the throne. He's also now killed a man on hallowed ground, which means he'll be excommunicated. There is nothing that the Bruce can do but ride up to Scone and take the crown of Scotland. Sit and take the crown. And that's what he does. He becomes the King of Scotland. And you'd think, well, it's all roses and light now. But no, because you see, he's an outlaw king, as the upcoming movie, don't get me started again, is saying. And he hid in the heather, it was said, for years, fighting the English skirmish, guerrilla warfare, one of the things that the Scots are great at. And as he did that, he built up support and armies and armies and armies. And he started, slowly but surely, to take the castles back from the English and push them out of Scotland. You see, the Bruce knew one thing. Even his predecessor, William Wallace, and let's not get me started in that movie, knew this. The Scots couldn't take the English in open field. There was no way. We couldn't stand up to their heavy cavalry charge. The Bruce knew that a big war wouldn't work. It had to be this small guerrilla warfare. So this is what he was doing. And it came to a point that there was only a few castles left. Edinburgh Castle, Stirling Castle, the bigger ones. So what the Bruce did is he charged his brother Edward the Bruce to take Stirling, the gateway to the north. And Edward went up, lay siege to Stirling, and it was stalemate. So he decides in his wisdom that the best solution would be to make a deal. The deal was simple. He offers the English garrison this. If within a year an English army has not come up to Stirling to relieve you, you must leave the castle and hand it over to the Scots. However, if an English army does arrive, then the Scots will retreat and never lay claim to this castle again. Now the governor of the castle thinks this is great because he knows he can get message to the English now. They'll bring up an army. Edward the Bruce goes to his brother and discovers what a terrible mistake he's made. Robert the Bruce is furious. Literally, his brother has just handed the English the key to what they wanted and what the Bruce didn't. Open warfare. Field warfare. The English can bring up their archers, they can bring up their infantry, they can bring up their cavalry, and they would mow down the Scots. The Bruce is furious at this, but now he knows he's got to build his armies properly, because the stage is set for the Battle of Bannockburn. Now the Scots get there early and they start laying out traps for the horses and fire pits and everything. They have their camp with their backs to the forest because the Bruce knows that they may need to retreat and escape. He's thinking about this all the way up to the battle. And when the English armies eventually arrive, and I'll tell you, they're in a bad way because Longshanks has died. His son has taken over. His son is supposed to be rather effeminate and useless at leadership. There's dissent in the ranks already because he's giving his favourite gentlemen positions of power that don't know what they're doing. But they arrive after a huge fast-paced walk up to Scotland. They start setting up camp. And Robert the Bruce now knows it's happening. It's on. He needs to give his army a morale boost. So it's said that one day he was riding up and down in front of his army. He was on a palfrey. See, we didn't really have war horses. All we had was wee ponies. Because he wasn't expecting combat, he was only wearing light armour, leather jerkin, it was said, and he only had a single-handed axe at his side. He's riding up and down in front of his men, giving them inspiration. We're gonna crush this English army, and his men would go wild. We're gonna send them packing. His men would go wild. We're gonna wipe them off the face of the planet. All the kind of things that an army wants to hear their leaders say. They would have been inspired. They would have been motivated. The heavens would have been hearing their roar. But what was happening as the Bruce was doing this, he didn't realise that he was drifting further and further away from his men. And then it happened. Coming through the Tor Woods was a small group of English cavalry. They had decided that they were going to relieve the garrison at the castle. They didn't want this battle. Their new king was a waste of space. They were going to fulfil the deal, and the Scots would retreat, and that'd be it. They start galloping across the field towards the castle, and at their head was a young, arrogant knight called Guy de Bohun, Henry Guy de Bohun, or Henry de Bohun. There's variations of his name. But de Bohun was a young, arrogant knight, and he looks across the field and he sees a lone horseman, and he recognises him. It can be none other than Robert the Bruce, the King of the Scots. He's on his own, he's lightly armed. This is an opportunity, and the Bowen takes that opportunity, dropping his visor, kicking the flanks of his horse, lifting his lance. He starts to charge across the battlefield. Well, the Scottish army, on seeing this, would have gone crazy, screaming and roaring at their king, starting to run towards him to protect him, but knowing that he was so far away on foot, none of them would reach him. The Bowen was charging closer and closer. These horses, it was said, could reach up to 30 kilometres an hour, a heck of a speed for a heavy armed horse. And it was said in that day that the Bruce did nothing. He turned his horse to face the Bowen, watched that knight charging closer and closer, and didn't move in his saddle. The Scots would have been screaming, running closer and closer, begging their king to ride towards them to safety. The Bowen would have been thinking about all the wealth and glory and riches. He was potentially to become the most famous man in England. And the Bruce did nothing. He sat on his horse and waited. The Scots would have been wailing, knowing that if the Bruce dies, it is all over. The Bowen would have been just in heaven. This is it. This is his hour of glory. And the Bruce sat on his horse, doing nothing. Had he given up? Had he realised that there was no other option? Death was the only way. Closer and closer the Bowen gets, targeting that lance towards the Bruce's heart, knowing that one hit would rip the man asunder. And the Bruce sits there and waits for the end. And it was said that as the lance came within a hair's width of Robert the Bruce, he clicked his heels into the flanks of his palfrey and it stepped to the side. He rose high in his saddle, pulling out his single-handed axe and crashing it down on the skull of the Bowen, cleaving both helm and skull in twain. The lifeless body of the Bowen would have crashed to the earth without even knowing he was dead. The Scottish army would have cheered and roared, filling the world with pleasure and happiness and celebration at what their king had just done. And it was said that the Bruce clipped the flanks of his horse and slowly walked it back into his ranks. The Scots would have been cheering, but the Bruce had an open court. His men would have berated him. They would have made his lugs burn that day for such a foolish act. Without him, the cause would have been lost. And the Bruce, he took it graciously, didn't say a word. Stood there, listened to his men, and acknowledged it. The only thing that the Bruce said that day was when he looked down and saw the broken axe handle still clenched tightly in his fist, was with a degree of sadness when he realised he'd broken his favourite axe. And that is a very famous account of Robert the Bruce and the Bowen. And the reason I love that wee story is because for the first time in many pieces of historical history, it's one of the only times that Scotland and England have ever agreed. Both parties agree this incident happened. Now, whether the Bruce cleaved helm and skull in twain, I don't know. A lot of historians challenge this. A lot of them believe that it was one of the axes with a spike on the end. So instead of using the flat, sharpened edge of the axe, he'd maybe rotated it and used what I call the tin opener and basically embedded the axe in the skull of the Bowen. The axe would have broken because the Bruce was sitting still, and that guy was charging towards him, so all that makes sense. But one of the things I read, this really interesting article that I love, because it would appear that the next day the Bruce didn't take full action in Bannockburn. He was always staying back in reserve, and one of the beliefs is it's because he'd actually broken his arm. potentially shattered his wrist and lower arm. Because when you think about it, he's just embedded an axe in a guy's skull that's charging at 30 kilometres an hour. That would have wrenched, if not anything, his arm out of the socket. He was clenching the axe handle, it was said, potentially because he couldn't release it because it was clamped shut with the nerve damage or whatever damage he'd done to his hand. So therefore he couldn't fight the next day because he couldn't actually use his arm. Now, whether that's true or not, it matters not, because Robert the Bruce is a legend in Scotland, a great hero that came and took Scotland to a new level, eventually winning its independence. Not after Bannockburn, may I add. Edward's son fled the battlefield in fear, and the Scots chased the English out of Scotland, basically massacring them en route. And it took, I think, another 10, 15, don't quote me, my history has just slipped on this, years until Robert the Bruce was declared King of Scotland and it was given its independence. And that was actually Edward's son's son. Longshank's son's son eventually declared, the Bruce the legitimate King of Scots. Very interesting, dark times, wonderful stories. I mean, I love it. I love Scottish history. There's so much there. And you know what? It's continuous, because even to this day we have great things happening about Robert the Bruce, the Outlaw King. And even Robert Burns wrote Scots Wha Hae after the excitement and passion that he'd read about from the Bannockburn incidents. So there's so many great pieces of Scottish history happening out there. So let's move on after the excitement of Robert the Bruce, and let's give you a new book recommendation for this podcast episode. We've talked about medieval, we've talked about Robert the Bruce. You know what? There's a great collection of stories out there that I think just kind of work with any medieval environment. And you know what? It's Chaucer. Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. I think it's a great read. I mean, I'm not going to lie, it's a complex read because obviously they're using a very distinctive sort of language structure and some words that just we are not familiar with these days. But Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, I love it. I've got the Signet's classic version. It's just a really nice little paperback, and it's only got a selection of the tales, but from what I can see, it's a pretty solid selection. You've got the Knight's Tale, you've got the Shipman's Tale, you've got the Miller's Tale, the Parson's Tale. You've got all the kind of more favourite ones. And the Knight's Tale, of course, if anyone's familiar, became a movie with Heath Ledger, the Knight's Tale. Yeah, that's right, isn't it? Yeah, the Knight's Tale. They did actually do that. I might have got that name wrong. I'm pretty sure that's what the movie was called. And I loved it because it was this kind of modernised and eclectic mix of Chaucer. But I would highly recommend anyone who loves some really good classic medieval English literature styles, some really interesting stories, a little bit of a twist, a little bit of fun, just something with a really good feel to it, and a challenge to read where you're having to learn a little bit of a different sort of language structure and some really wonderful words. I would definitely pick up the Signet Classic, Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, Canadian $6.99. It's not going to cost you much. It's a $7 book, folks. So definitely worth picking up. But Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales falls in line with this podcast, and I would highly recommend that for my book recommendation for this podcast. And as always, on the back of our book review, we have our podcast recommendation. As you know, we are sponsored by the Alberta Podcast Network with ATB. And what I always like to do is recommend another podcast from that network. There is such a great selection on there. And this recommendation, I think, falls in line with what we've kind of been talking about. Not medieval fairs, not history, but certainly movies. The recommendation I want to give for this podcast is Emily Missed Out. Emily Missed Out is this wonderful show, and it's done by Emily and Brianne. And what they do is they watch classic pop culture-filled movie gems that Emily has never seen. Hence the title, Emily Missed Out. So this is a great podcast, just kind of experiencing somebody who's never experienced some of the movies that we may have loved and grown up with, and this person has never encountered them. The reactions, the fun, the frolics. So I would say join them as they determine if she missed out on these movies. So that is Emily Missed Out. Emily and Brianne watch classic pop culture filled movie gems that Emily has never seen, and maybe one day they'll watch Braveheart or Valhalla Rising and maybe Outlaw King in a few years. However, I would probably say please don't, because if they listen to this recommendation and then decide to watch them, I'm to blame. So we're not going to do that. But folks, have a look at Emily Missed Out. It's part of the Alberta Podcast Network. Okay, folks, well, that brings us to the end of yet another Bothy Storytelling podcast. I hope you enjoyed my rambles about medieval fairs, about Robert the Bruce, about Christopher, whatever his name is, the American playing the Scotsman. Do bear in mind, we do have a Patreon page, the Bothy Storytelling Podcast on Patreon. Have a look at it. Basically, we're asking you for the price of a cup of coffee to help us support this podcast, become a patron, and basically help this develop and grow. As you know, I'm now in my little home studio, but there's still more to do. There's still more development required. So please become a Patreon member and help support this podcast to grow, develop, and become all that it can be. However, with saying that, I want to thank you all for joining me on yet another episode of the Bothy Storytelling Podcast. I've been your host, Calum, Lykan, and I'll see and hopefully give you some more fun on the next episode, which will be coming out shortly.